Welcome to this latest First Voice podcast, brought to you by First Voice magazine, the official flagship magazine of the Federation of Small Businesses, and the go-to podcast for news, tips, and important information for small businesses. In this episode, we'll be discussing tips for returning your employees to work post-COVID. With furlough now over and lockdown measures increasingly easing, returning your staff to your offices and sites can be a bit of a minefield. Small businesses have people working in many different environments: offices, shops, hospitality areas, sites, third-party venues, and of course, out and about in vans and cars together. So getting your people back can be a challenge. Therefore, in this episode, we will run through some steps you can take to ensure your staff are able to return as safely as possible. To share some of those steps, I'm joined by Jonathan Wensley, Director and Consultant at Be-It, which are safety, health, environmental specialists. Jonathan, thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for having us, John.
Great stuff. Look, let's get straight into this one. There's a few areas to cover. Small business employees work in all sorts of environments, as we just discussed, but let's start with offices and closed spaces. What are the things that small businesses need to be aware of to do in advance of staff coming back in, such as sort of assessments and deep cleans and things?
I think just before kind of jumping into coming back into the workplace, I would always kind of urge businesses just kind of spare a thought for, do we all need to come back into the office, and perhaps there's a different way of working. There's been plenty of discussion on LinkedIn about hybrid working, and there's quite a few businesses that have adopted, a way of working from home and working in the office, and have seen benefits to actually completely working from home. So I think what I would say is just first to kind of give that a thought, and think back to what the first lockdown was like, kind of differences that we noticed, and kind of take some of that on board. One thing I can completely reflect on is less cars on the road, and thinking about air emissions. As you introduced me at the beginning, that my role in my consultancy is health, safety, and environment. So spare a thought for the environment. I just did a bit of research this morning in terms of air emissions, and they actually dropped by 36% in the first lockdown in 2020. So I think there's definitely a compelling argument for businesses exploring a balance between working in the workplace and working from home. After all, less cars on the road mean less traffic and less stress, and I think we all need less stress. There's definitely an environmental impact, and aside from that, efficiencies that can be achieved in businesses. Definitely a better work-life balance, perhaps for some. And I suppose bringing it to the discussion around COVID is risk management of transmission of the virus. So if you have less people working closely together, the lower the risk.
Yeah, so I think that's a good message. Before you embark on just getting everybody back in, think about how you want to set up your working arrangements going forward, whether there's actually value in having everybody in, just how do you want to run your operations to be maybe, greener and more efficient, but also to stem the flow of transmission of COVID as well. Also, just before we get people back in offices, are there things that small business owners need to be doing policy-wise? Have they got to be looking at updating health and safety policies and things like that? Is there stuff they need to do before people come back in?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, if you make the assumption that some of these businesses have remained completely unoccupied, the first things that businesses need to do anyway is revisit their original policies. Do they need updating? But also looking at other risks as well in the business, such as Legionella risk, and looking at the electrics in businesses, looking at emergency lighting. So not only do they need to look at the functionality of this equipment that keeps the business operating, but reviewing the policies that support these, such as maintenance work needs to be carried out. But then if you're looking at the policy in terms of, okay, so we're getting everyone back into the workplace, where can they get help with that? Obviously, my consultancy, Be-It, can provide that. But, this isn't a sales pitch. There's lots of other consultancies out there There's lots of information on the internet. There's the HSE website, which is a great source of information. But there's also, for some businesses, where they have, unions on site, their trade union representatives, are usually quite well skilled and well placed to support on policy making and review. I've been working with lots of SMEs and even some larger businesses and supporting public health and environmental health through a local authority in West Yorkshire during the pandemic. And one of the key things I keep promoting when it comes to policies is that when you're writing policies, they need to be realistic. There's no point setting yourselves up for a fail. They've got to work in practice. Otherwise, what's the point? They've got to hit the objective. Policies are there to convey to staff and stakeholders how the business operates, what their arrangements and provisions are, what resources they've got to support these. So it's really important that, when businesses do review their policies, and they need to review them in relation to the workplace, but COVID risk transmission, is what are they actually going to do? What works in real life?
Understanding that balance between wanting to be having everything written down and doing all of the right things versus actually what's practical and gets people in, I guess.
Exactly.
Once that kind of small businesses have worked through that sort of admin side of things, we start getting people back into office environments. What are the things they need to be thinking about there in terms of spacing, desk use, social distancing? Where are we at with that stuff?
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting, working with these businesses that, the restrictions have all but disappeared, but the virus hasn't disappeared. The risk of transmission is still there. It's still a huge concern. And businesses have a legal and moral duty under health and safety law to implement suitable and appropriate controls to manage the risk. And what I would say is, and what I continue to say with businesses, that is kind of think back to, the restrictions that were in place kind of, April, May last year, and kind of go back to that kind of way, or a kind of a style of that, because, you still need to be looking at your social distancing. You still need to be spreading people about and limiting your numbers, occupying one space. And think about working bubbles as well. That was a thing of last year, and actually they do work quite well because they're really useful in terms of ensuring, good business continuity. Because if you think that you've got a number of people in occupying an office space, if you had an outbreak in the office space and everyone's working quite closely together, the chances are that quite a few people will get that virus, and will your business be able to continue to operate? So in terms of COVID transmission and risk mitigation, in terms of business, it's not just about transmission, which, is so key because it's such high risk, but it's thinking about your business. Can it operate? How are you going to continue to work if you have an outbreak? I continue to see outbreaks. Today there was a business I was dealing with earlier this week. It is wiping out 4 or 5 people in a relatively small outbreak, but that means that they're not able to continue working. Some can work from home, but some not so much in the office.
Yeah, so even if the requirements to have those measures in place have to some degree been removed, what we're saying is it might be well worth having those and retaining those, because it might protect your operations and your business and your staff. So keep some of those in place.
Yeah. Sorry, John. I think the other kind of key points as well is ventilation. That's something that is that's really kind of built up momentum over last year in terms of it is airborne, and businesses need to look at the conditioning they've got in place, the air conditioning in place. A lot of units that businesses have are recirculating. If you're recirculating stagnant air in an office environment, that's only going to spread the virus further. So businesses need to really look at natural ventilation.
Yeah, it's really good guidance. And, we mentioned at the top that, not all small businesses are office-based small businesses. There's people out in vans and cars and warehouses and shops and working on third-party sites as well. What other things do small businesses need to consider to protect workers that are in other environments?
I think it always comes back to the hierarchy of controls in health and safety, and a lot of anything when it comes down to risk mitigation is firstly asking yourselves, do you need to do it? Do you need to be out in that van? Do we need to be sharing these vans? If you can keep one person to one van, one person to one car, that's always the best thing. So always kind of looking at limiting the number of people occupying a vehicle or a warehouse or other spaces or shops. Where it's not possible to do that, reduce the frequency of contact between individuals. But if you do need a couple of people in a car, again, ventilation is key. Get the windows open. Don't sit next to each other. If there's two people in a car, one driving, one sat in the rear. And I know there's lots of advice about face coverings and previous restrictions said about face coverings. There's limitations to face coverings. Your best controls are always, distance, cleaning, and ventilation.
Yeah, brilliant. And you touched on face masks there. Where are we at with face masks? It seems to be that when I'm moving around on public transport and things, I don't see everybody wearing them. Is there an obligation for small businesses to have staff in face masks, or what's the process there at the moment?
I mean, it's ultimately down to businesses. That's where we are currently. There's no restrictions, so it's down to businesses to do their own assessment to determine, is there a need for face coverings or not? Lots of businesses are asking staff to wear face coverings as they're walking around the building, occupying communal areas. And there's somewhere saying, actually, we see the risk to be quite low, so we don't feel that there's a need for it. I mean, ultimately, face coverings or, a mask PPE, whatever you want to call it, in terms of health and safety, it's always the last line of defence.
Okay, good stuff. And I thought we would just touch on communication and how important that is. Maybe sometimes when we're getting measures in place, we forget that to keep people informed of the reasons that we're doing it, and an open communication with staff. Is that important?
Oh, absolutely. I think one thing that the pandemic's taught us all is that communication and human interaction is something that we absolutely need, and we struggle so much without it. And I don't think we ever really realised that until we were forced into a lockdown position. So yeah, communication is so key. We've all gone through this outbreak, and what businesses should really be doing is kind of sitting down with individuals, having that openness, having that one-to-one conversation, being honest with them, and then that's the only way that communication is going to work. So yeah, communication, I think, is more important than it ever was before.
Brilliant. And then a final point around where small businesses can get a bit more help, advice and guidance. You touched on the health and safety executive earlier having some information. Is there a set policy or standard process around this stuff, or is there some government guidance that can help small businesses?
Yeah, there's still government guidance out there. That's updated on a very regular basis. I'm looking at that nearly weekly. So there's some really good guidance documents in there. As I said before, HSE website. There's also CIBSE, which is CIBSE.
Yeah.
They're really good for looking at ventilation. So that's what they do. It's all about buildings and facilities and looking at ventilation. They've got some great guidance on there. I think just one other thing I just want to add, just kind of advise businesses, just with us coming towards Christmas. Obviously, quite a few businesses are going to be having Christmas parties. And, that's great. We all need to get together. But just think about people returning to the office after that Christmas party. Perhaps you want to introduce testing, lateral flow testing into your kind of policies, your arrangements as people come back after Christmas, because people are mixing. You have no idea what, the environments that people have been in. So just kind of protecting your staff, protecting your business. When people are coming back after the Christmas period, put in perhaps some testing regime a couple of times a week. just as another control, just to reduce the risk of an outbreak in your business.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and something that I'm sure a lot of small business owners won't have thought about. Brilliant. That's a really great place for us to wrap that discussion on tips for returning your employees to work post-COVID. Jonathan, thanks so much. I'd like to thank you for joining us and lending your experience around that topic. Thank you also to our audience for listening in. Please do remember to subscribe to the First Voice podcast to receive regular updates and guidance on the big issues affecting small businesses. And do remember also that you can find a whole host of additional webinars, podcasts, and other content, including plenty on this topic of getting employees back into work, on the First Voice website at firstvoice.fsb.org.uk. Many thanks.